Congressman, why have you decided to make this run for the U.S. Senate? I mean, you left Capitol Hill, went back into the private sector. Now you're going back into public life, or at least attempting to. Why?
My family is spread around the state, Escanaba and Saginaw and downstate in Oakland County. People are hurting. My family's hurting. My neighbors are hurting. Michiganders are hurting. And sometimes you have an experience that can help with this. And I look at the cost of groceries, the cost of gasoline, the cost of housing, the fact that we have a absolute broken, wide open border that's, I think, hurting the country. The EV mandates. These are things I can go back and build on relationships I already have and get things done for the state of Michigan. And so I thought enough of the problems and the idea that we have real solutions so that people can get their lives back on track, that was worth me getting back in and going through all this.
You just mentioned working for the state and the people of Michigan. What are the top 3 issues that you think are existing here in Michigan that you can impact from Washington?
Yeah, cost of living, groceries, gasoline. We talk about cost of housing. These are things we can impact. Obviously, there'll be a little bit of a lag, but I think we can impact pretty quickly with policies like being energy independent, those kinds of things. Secondly, the wide open border. I mean, this has become a number 1 or 2 issue in every community I go to. We're really worried about their own personal safety and security based on this wide open border. I can fix that border. I'm a former law enforcement guy. We're going to get this done. And then lastly, EV mandates and then future jobs here in the state. These EV mandates are really disrupting in a negative way our car company here. We've lost 29,000 manufacturing jobs in just the last 4 years. Now we have layoffs of 2,400 at Stellantis, 1,000 at General Motors. Ford announced $5 billion in losses in their EV unit. You can't have the government tell a company what kind of car to build and then tell the customer what kind of car you have to buy. It doesn't work in America. Markets work, mandates don't. So we got to get them out of the business of ruining our car companies here, get people back to work. We can do hybrids, keep our employment base here, and impact the environment in a positive way. Why are we doing this the other way? It doesn't make sense to me.
You and Senator Cornyn were here together, and you both had some really good things to say about bipartisanship and working with the other side to affect good legislation for all of the people. That seems to be a broken system on Capitol Hill and in Washington in general. How do you bring back bipartisanship that does good for the people?
Yeah, and again, I think leadership is the most important thing here. And the good news is this isn't, an election year thing for me. I've done this. I've shown that I can do bipartisan coalition building to get hard things done. I've done it. And so I'm going to take that same leadership, that experience, now my private sector experience, and go back to Washington, D.C., and get people in a room to start working on these big issues. Remember, I talked to a woman the other day who, in tears, tells me how she has to go to the food pantry the last 2 days of the month to feed her 4 children, right? We have to fix this. That is not partisan. That's not Republican. That's not Democrat. That's just trouble in your own personal finances. And by the way, she's working part-time. Her husband's working full-time. This is the state of where we're at. We have a lot of work to do for those people. These are our neighbors. These are our friends. These are people we work with. We've got to fix those kinds of problems. I will work with anyone to fix those problems.
Last question from you, sir. Your opponent on the Democratic side also is experienced. You bring experience to the table. What do you see as the biggest differences between you? Beside Republican, Democrat, what are the biggest differences between you and Congresswoman Slotkin?
Well, listen, I think the policies of Biden and Harris have not been good to Michigan, and she supported those 100%. All that spending that gave us higher grocery prices and gas prices, she was there 100%. And this is just a philosophical difference. She supports those things. She supported the EV mandates over and over again, including about 6 weeks ago. She voted on them again, even knowing what the employment prospects here are in Michigan. And so I think being from Michigan, spending over 50 years here, working as in the assembly line in a company here in Michigan, gives you a perspective. And these aren't stats on a board for me. These are people, friends, and neighbors that I know. And so I think taking that is our biggest difference here. So I go back. I know that you shouldn't be voting to ban gas engines My opponent unfortunately did. Or gas stoves, my opponent unfortunately did. Voting for EV mandates, my opponent unfortunately did. We're not going to do those kinds of things because we know what it takes to keep Michigan working and get our financial lives in order. If we don't do something about the high grocery prices and gas prices, I mean, families are going to be in a big hurt. 23% car repossession rate increase last year alone. Think of that, right? That means people are struggling. We have over a collective $1 trillion of credit card debt, which means people are buying groceries at 23% interest. Not sustainable. The biggest difference is I'm going to fix all those things.
Congresswoman, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
Certainly appreciate it. Tell everybody why you have decided to make this run for the U.S. Senate.
Yeah, well, I'm just here with our senior senator, Debbie Stabenow, who announced her retirement and wanted a smooth handoff to the next generation. And, I had to think about it. And I think it's important that you have affirmative, positive reasons why you run. So for me, the sun and moon for me is a strong middle class. Michigan invented the middle class. We need jobs with dignity that pay for more things. And then we need to attack the costs that are costing us so much. Healthcare, prescription drugs, childcare, housing. I want to make more things in Michigan. That's my number 2. Chips and pharmaceuticals and cars and all the things. Number 3, I want to protect our kids from the things that are truly harming them. And then lastly, I'll be the youngest woman youngest Democrat in the Senate, or youngest Democratic woman, in the Senate if I win. So I think it's just about a different generation that approaches problems differently. We're on this boat together as Americans. There's no red America and blue America. We need reasonable people who maybe disagree on things, but solve problems in a civil way and move our country forward. So those are my 4 big reasons why.
And I would say that the first 3 would probably qualify as your top 3 issues. So how do you affect change for Michiganders from Washington on those issues?
Yeah, so number 1, we got to bring more manufacturing back to Michigan. That's how you create more jobs, and those good jobs with benefits that are for a lifetime. So that means being really sort of affirmative about, and aggressive even, about bringing supply chains home from China, right? I want to make that next generation of vehicles. I want to make batteries here. I want to make all those things in the United States and not cede it to China. Number 2, you got to attack people's major costs. When they sit around the kitchen table, healthcare, prescription drugs, those are usually right up there with a family housing. So you got to attack those things by allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices, price transparency so you get to know how much your drugs are, right? Just good old-fashioned competition. And then lastly, next year is going to be a big year to rewrite tax code. And do you, when you're sitting there in a negotiation, are you thinking on behalf of middle-class Americans, working people, or are you focusing on the ultra-wealthy? And so a tax policy that helps keep more money in your wallet.
I heard both you and Senator Stabenow talk about the importance of bipartisanship, something that's been missing in Washington for several cycles now.
Yeah.
How do you bring that back?
So first, I think the people you elect have to be reasonable and civil people. You can't expect bipartisanship to work when you elect people who throw bombs at each other and who get into Twitter fights and who see politics as warfare, right? That doesn't work. I'm a Democrat who's represented a Republican-leaning district, right? I wouldn't be here without people who voted both Democrat and Republican on the same ticket. So you got to elect reasonable people, and then you have to make an effort every single day to reach across the aisle. We're here right now, at a VFW. Veteran legislation should always be bipartisan. Broadband internet should be bipartisan. I can think of a million things that don't make the headlines that should always be bipartisan. So you start there and you build some trust and you see each other as human beings, and you absolutely refuse to get involved in that warfare that characterizes our politics right now.
You and your opponent both, I would say, are uniquely qualified, at least for the job, whichever one wins. Your opponent served in Congress. He's served, in the intelligence community, as have you. Aside from the difference in party, what differentiates Elissa Slotkin from Mike Rogers?
Yeah, I think, we have really big differences, and they're right there in our record because we were both elected, right? Mr. Rogers was an elected politician for 20 years in office. I've been in for 5 or so in office. So the records are there to see. we disagree fundamentally on something like the future of retirement, right? I believe that if you work your whole life and pay into Social Security and Medicare, you deserve to live a life with dignity once you retire. Mr. Rogers voted against Medicare and Social Security, voted to privatize and cut them over a dozen times. He voted to raise the retirement age. I don't support that. He voted against allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices. So look, he has his reasons, I'm sure, but those are really big differences in the future of retirement and how we see it and who's fighting for our seniors, to me, is a very big difference. And then, frankly, on our rights and our democracy. I think Mr. Rogers used to be someone who, talked about making sure our democracy was sound and, being clear about who won elections. Now he's walked away from all of that. I believe in a woman's right to choose and that women should be able to make decisions for themselves with their families, with their doctors. He's voted, over a dozen times, frankly, for every bill, ban, and restriction on abortion for 20 years. So there's some pretty big differences, and I'm just a big supporter of let's just put it out there. We don't have to be nasty about it, but also own your record. You put your money where your mouth is, just own it on trying to privatize something like Social Security and Medicare. So those are pretty big differences.
Thank you.
You bet. Smooth handoff to the next generation, and I had to think about it, and I think it's important that you have affirmative, positive.